The time, 20 minutes to 7. The Queen's former doctor, Sir Richard Thompson, is one of 6 eminent physicians claiming that patients are too often given useless and sometimes harmful drugs that they don't need so that drugs companies can make a profit. Adam Brimelow is our health correspondent. Adam, this is quite a list of criticisms against the big drugs companies and the way the whole system operates.
Yes, really, what it boils down to is a question of trust in the way that medical research is carried out. And we know that this is something that's troubled the Chief Medical Officer for England, who last year asked the Academy of Medical Sciences to look into the safety and efficacy of medicine, and it's asked them to look at how evidence is collected, possible conflicts of interest, how the findings are communicated in the medical community and to the public. But the campaign, which is being led by a London cardiologist, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, is arguing that the Academy of Medical Sciences is itself too close to industry, and that it is part of a kind of medical research establishment which has become part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
And what does he suggest could be done about that?
What he's looking for is a separate what he would regard as a properly independent inquiry by the Public Accounts Committee of MPs, something that is not part of that establishment, because he says, as you referred to, there are essentially too many prescription medicines being dished out, and the problem that's leading to is that they're often harmful to patients, and that the UK regulators aren't properly protecting the public. They too, he argues, are part of the problem, and it's all to do with this pervasive and what he regards as harmful influence of the pharmaceutical industry, which he says needs to be curbed.
Well, we shall speak to him, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, as well as the President of the Academy of Medical Sciences, about 8:30 this morning. Adam Brimelow, thanks very much. The time is now 19 minutes past 8. A group of senior doctors, including the Queen's former physician, is raising concerns today about the influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the NHS. The 6 doctors include Sir Richard Thompson, who also served as president of the Royal College of Physicians, and who says we need a public inquiry into the way that the effectiveness of drugs is assessed. The group of doctors is led by the consultant cardiologist, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who's with us in the studio now. Good morning.
Good morning, Michelle.
And you say that we have in this country an epidemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed patients.
Absolutely, Michelle. I mean, the first thing to say is we have a complete healthcare system failure where we are prescribing too much medicine, and the root cause behind this problem, which is resulting, as you say, and I have said, an epidemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed patients, is biased funding of research. So that's research that's funded because it's likely to be profitable, not beneficial for patients. Biased reporting in medical journals, biased reporting in the media, and commercial conflicts of interest.
Right, these are very sweeping allegations to make. What is your evidence? Because there are always going to be links, aren't there, between interested parties. So, for example, drugs companies and doctors, they might attend the same meetings and go to the same things because that is their work.
You're absolutely right, Michelle, and that's why I think we need to take a step back and look at this as a whole system problem issue, because all of these things at every level are being influenced by commercial interests. That's the way the system is, but it's resulting in a lot of harm. So let me just give you an example. The FDA now reports over 120,000 deaths in 2014 because of adverse drug reactions, which has tripled in a decade.
Right, that's in the United States.
That's the United States. Peter Gosher, co-founder of the Cochrane Collaboration, recently did analysis in BMJ looking just at psychiatric medications, and his estimate was 500,000 deaths being caused because of medications that are overprescribed, and this is in the USA and Europe combined, European Union.
So you don't have evidence to back up what you are saying as far as the UK is concerned?
Oh no, there's extensive evidence. I mean, the thing is, we've seen very recently, for example, there was an investigation done by the BMJ that actually showed that one of the drugs that we've been using in the last few years in good faith, which is a blood-thinning drug called rivaroxaban, that the device used in the original trial, published in one of the major medical journals, was faulty, basically casting huge doubts onto the outcome of the trial. But Michelle, just to say, the evidence on this in terms of in the UK, we know about a quarter of hospital admissions in the elderly are because of adverse drug reactions, 1 in 3 over the age of 75. If you're elderly and you fall and you fracture a hip, then a quarter of those patients will die. This is a major issue.
Well, and drugs companies and others would say that there are always risks when you take medication. When you've spoken out before, for example, about the use of statins, and you've been concerned about widespread use of statins, when you wrote a piece about this in the BMJ in 2014, which said side effects of statins occurred in 18 to 20% of people, that research was flawed and later acknowledged as flawed. So you've been wrong before when you've spoken about the risk.
I'm very glad you raised that point. Because we have written an editorial recently with Simon Capewell, the Vice President, Faculty of Public Health, actually on the overall data on statins since then.
Right, but the 20% figure was withdrawn.
That 20% figure was corrected, absolutely right. But actually, I'll be honest with you now, it was actually probably an underestimate. In fact, actually, the side effects that interfere with the quality of life may well be higher, and I'll just tell you why.
No, well, are you going to? I want to talk to Professor Sir Robert Leckler in a moment about this, but I presume that if you believe differently, you will put forward evidence for that in a subsequent piece.
Well, there has been actually emerging evidence last 2 weeks from Michel Delorge, a reputed cardiologist in France, has actually even suggested now that the whole evidence base behind statins themselves is very questionable, even for efficacy in all patient groups.
All right. Well, Professor Sir Robert Leckler is also here in the studio. He's the president of the Academy of Medical Sciences. Now, you at the Academy have been asked by the Chief Medical Officer to look into this same issue of the influence of the evaluation of drugs. Is there a problem?
What I would say is that doctors in this country are trained to practice evidence-based medicine and to indulge in evidence-based prescribing, and I think the medical profession does that. Are we perfect at doing it? No, we're not. So are there some occasions when drugs may be overprescribed? Probably so. Certainly antibiotics we now recognise were excessively used, and we're now very careful about that because of antibiotic resistance. There's a very good illustration of an in-course adjustment. But the notion that there is a great culture of overprescribing, I don't recognise. And of course, there's no incentive to overprescribe. There's no reward for prescribing drugs in this country, fortunately. So I think the key is to always be rigorous about evaluation. And we're very fortunate to have NICE, the National Institute of Healthcare and Clinical Excellence, which is a very rigorous evaluator of evidence. But the Academy has launched into a piece of work now to see how society evaluates evidence, because it needs a public debate, and I think the public should comment.
How can society evaluate evidence? We want a decent, rigorous system where the system evaluates.
Well, I think the system does, but some of the data coming out is confusing. I think statins is a very good case in point. There have been confusing messages coming out about statins, and some of the risk-benefit analyses are quite subtle. So I think that we do need a public dialogue, and the public should decide at what level of risk it is sensible for them to medicate or not. So I think it does need a public debate, and the Academy's piece of work is looking at that. It's looking at risk, it's looking at conflict of interest and how best to manage that to avoid bias, and it's also going to look at how to communicate risk more effectively.
Well, what about the influence or perhaps over-influence or undue influence of the drugs industry on the NHS? For example, if you look at the sorts of drugs that are developed, that the accusation that more money is put into the development of drugs that are more profitable rather than perhaps more ordinary but much needed drugs like antibiotics.
So, of course, pharmaceutical industries will tend to go where there is a profit margin to be made, otherwise they won't be able to afford to make the drug. I think that's understandable, and so there is huge unmet need, and we all need to work together to get drugs developed in the right places. But what I would say, which is a very important point, I think, is that it's vital that the academic world and the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech industry and the NHS work together to deal with the unmet need. I think there's, rather than any suggestion that it's bad for collaboration with industry, it's essential there's collaboration with industry in order to develop better drugs for those unmet needs.
Professor Sir Robert Leckler and Dr. Aseem Malhotra, thank you both very much.